All right, good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you're calling from. Welcome to our discovery session for today. Today, we'll be hearing from Abhi about the Efficiency for All report that was recently released by Efficiency Canada. Before we start, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. Efficiency Canada is housed at Carleton University's Sustainable Energy Research Centre, which is located on the traditional unceded lands of the Algonquin Nation. I'm actually calling you today from Jajage, or Montreal, which is located on the traditional unceded lands and waters of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation. Wherever you're joining us from today, I ask you to please take a moment to reflect on the land you're on and what that means, and I will share a link in the chat of a resource you can use. Now, today, for the first time ever, we'll be hosting an after party after this session on the Discovery Hub, where we'll have about 15 minutes to ask Abhi additional questions after our usual Q&A. Details on the hub and how you can register will be in the chat as well. So I'm very excited to introduce today my colleague and friend, Abhi. He'll be speaking about the new report that we've produced. And so Abhi, please take it away.
Oh, thank you so much, Tseli. So my name is Abhi, and I'm going to give you an overview of a recent report we just released. It's sort of a peering under the hood of provincial and territorial low-income energy efficiency programs with some key lessons for federal policy in Canada. And this is what we're going to learn today. One, we'll talk about why low-income energy efficiency matters and why it matters now. I'll go over some key features of existing provincial programs. We'll talk about strengths and gaps of existing programs in relation to reducing energy poverty and getting to net zero emissions. And in the end, we'll circle back and talk about a responsible and responsive role that the federal government can play in expanding the scale and scope of low-income energy efficiency in Canada. So let's dive right in. So first, we'll talk about why low-income energy efficiency matters now. So the first thing to remember is that low-income households are more vulnerable to energy poverty. So energy poverty is characterized by the condition where a household faces challenges meeting their home energy needs. So this could be paying their bills on time, or heating or cooling their home adequately, so sometimes people in energy poverty turn the thermostat down and put on 3 or 4 layers of clothing, right? Another characteristic of energy poverty is when households can access energy efficiency measures that they need to reduce their energy cost burdens. Now, low-income households are more vulnerable to energy poverty, but energy poverty is also caused by high energy rates and or living in less efficient homes. These characteristics can also push households that may be perhaps a little above what are standard definitions of low income into poverty. The interesting thing about low income energy efficiency is that low income households also tend to typically live in least efficient homes. And these are households that need energy efficiency measures the most to lock in savings in the long term. But paradoxically, these households also can't afford the upfront costs, or even if they were offered, let's say, a no interest-free loan, many low-income households cannot assume additional debt burdens. And so to reach these households, we need tailored approaches and smart policy to help these households reduce their energy use and thereby energy cost and energy cost burdens. Now, the reason why it matters now is because, like, I believe and we believe that energy efficiency should benefit all Canadians. And in order for our transition to be equitable and fair, transition to net zero, that is, energy poverty should be a priority. And the federal government can play a leadership role in achieving net zero emissions and reducing energy poverty. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I just wanted to note that to date, the federal government hasn't, in my view, played a very strong role in including low-income households as a part of their climate plans or taking strong action on energy poverty. So in order to do this, what we thought would be a good idea was to begin with, okay, let's just look at what programs in Canada, provincial, subnational jurisdictions are already doing now to help households in need with energy efficiency programs. So I'll talk about briefly features of what existing programs, what they're all doing, and then we'll categorize them a little bit based on target markets and program types and so on. So 2 things to remember about low-income energy efficiency programs in Canada, provincial programs. So one is that households are eligible through income. So low income cutoffs or low income measures. There's three different measures of poverty in Canada. StatsCan publishes three measures. Programs, most programs are based on some definition of what constitutes a household with low income. And there's a range, and you can go read the report, see the range. The interesting thing is that many programs set their threshold above, let's say, a low income cutoff, like 20% above, 30% above, perhaps recognizing that there are barriers to accessing low income programs above what we commonly understand are as definitions of low income. Second thing to remember is that these are turnkey, no cost. In most cases, these are no cost to participants. And in some few cases, they come at a very low cost to participants. So these are measures that are installed on behalf of participants. So they're not sitting around waiting for a loan to come through, or they're not taking a loan and waiting to pay it back and so on. So these are measures that are installed on behalf of participants by trained contractors and experts. These are two common features. So we categorize them in the report based on common measures and target markets. So our report focuses on the first three categories here. I'll go through them in a little bit more detail, come back and talk about the other three program types as well. So the first would be self-install programs. So these are common in, as you can see on the map there, on the West Coast and then in Ontario. So if you qualify, your household would receive a energy saving kit that you have to install yourself. So these would have like a little LED light bulb, a clothes rack, a water aerator, weather stripping around your doors and windows and so on. These programs rely on participants themselves to install these measures. And again, these are all at no cost to participants. The second type of program are what we are calling direct install programs, minor upgrades. So they start with a home energy walkthrough, right? So an expert would come to your home and walk around and help identify opportunities for saving energy. And they'll leave you with some of the things that you saw in the earlier self-install toolkit. So maybe a smart thermostat in addition, energy, LED light bulbs, high efficiency shower heads, and so on. These are common in most of the provinces, with the exception of the Atlantic provinces. And some of these programs, I must say, in some instances, may also do a major upgrade. So they might replace a refrigerator, for example, with an Energy Star refrigerator. But those components are not where most of their program investment is going, and that's also not where most of their savings is going. So contrast this with what we're calling direct install with major upgrades. So these are usually common in the Atlantic provinces, and the winterproofing program by Enbridge in Ontario has components of this as well. So these would be windows, basement, attic, wall insulation, like almost taking a whole home approach and focusing really on the comfort of the participant and helping improving outcomes for them while doing a major upgrade to the house. And so those three are what we focus most on the report. Just super quick, bonus rebate programs are additional rebates that low-income households would get on top of rebates that perhaps all households would get on equipment, on work that is already being done. So if you are a low-income household, you're replacing your furnace, you would get an additional rebate because you qualify as a low-income household. Supplemental programs, these are usually in the territories, northern territories, and I think PEI also has a program like this. So these are mostly they're like home repair programs. And if you're doing major renovation on your home, you would get a supplemental funding to do it in an energy saving way. So for energy efficiency measures alongside major home renovations or home repairs. And the last would be, custom multi-units. So these are multi-unit buildings have needs that are different from single-family units. For example, they have commercial heating and cooling equipment, but in-suite measures can be comparable to direct install with minor upgrades or major upgrades. So there are a lot of provinces that have programs that are specifically catered for multi-unit residences, and they might also include sort of design components and capacity building for property managers and building managers and so on. So actually, if you go on the blog that we published, we have an interactive dashboard, so you can kind of click and see what programs based on these program types, so you can learn more about them. Just a big overview of what programs are accomplishing. So what we find is that self-install programs that rely on participants themselves to install measures are reaching up to a 3% participation of low-income households. So among eligible households, they're reaching about 3% of households, but the savings are on the smaller end. Direct install with minor upgrades are reaching up to 1% of households, which is comparable to just residential retrofit rate based on 2017 to 2020 data. So they're on par with just all households' ability to pay residential markets doing installs on their home. Direct install with major upgrades are able to reach 1 to 2%. I think this is a ray of sunshine right here, is that with targeted, with funding and targeted approaches, you can actually exceed the ability to pay markets uptake rate while also delivering deeper, I should say, energy savings. So 17 to 40 gigajoules represents around 50 to 30% of energy reduction based on an average, like a median Canadian household's energy consumption. So let's talk about strengths and gaps. In terms of strengths, provincial programs are reaching a lot of low-income households and engaging them in energy efficiency. 55,000 households roughly every year participate in a low-income energy efficiency program in Canada. And they're able to do this because of deep institutional knowledge and local networks that provincial programs have built over a long period of time. The institutional knowledge comes from, there's examples in the report, so expert roundtables, they're engaging with stakeholders that have familiarity with the program participants. They have relationships with food banks, community service organizations. And just by the fact that some of these programs have existed for a great number of years, there's word of mouth that builds trust in the communities that need to be served by these programs. And I highlight this, especially in the context of thinking about what would a federal approach be. In my view, and we detail this in the report, it would be extremely challenging for the federal government to kind of replicate this effort at every province, because no two programs are alike. Every program is doing what the provincial systems are asking them to do, and they're able to achieve their milestones and targets based on these local relationship network. It would be very difficult for a federal government program to sort of replicate this at scale with like a one-size-fits-all approach across the whole country. Right? Let's talk about gaps. I want to be very clear here. These gaps are in reference to the two goals we mentioned earlier. So net zero emissions, getting to net zero emissions, and reducing energy poverty. Programs are, like I said, are a product of the policy environment that they're in, and within the context of what they're asked to do, they're doing what they're asked to do. But if we are to reach net zero emissions while also doing it in an equitable and fair way, we also need to pay attention to reducing energy poverty. So with those two goals in mind, let's talk about some of the gaps in existing programs, right? So one, investment in savings per household, investment in energy savings per household needs to increase substantially in order to meet our net zero goals. We need to think about achieving deeper savings per participating household. The other challenge is that fuel switching is not fuel switching to low carbon or zero carbon ready heating technology like hybrid heat pumps, for example, is not a common feature in most programs, even in circumstances where doing so would actually reduce house heating costs for households, especially when you combine it with some deep, building envelope measures and so on. We go into more detail in the report about program silos and who delivers the program, the consequence of that, why this happens. But just remember that fuel switching is not a common feature in programs. Well, existing programs don't have a mandate. They're not mandated or required to help with health and safety measures, like, for example, mold remediation or structural upgrades like, replacing a wall, even in instances where such upgrades would facilitate future energy efficiency upgrades because it's not within their mandate to deliver. As a result, a lot of the households that need it the most in poor structural condition are not able to participate in some of these programs. And the last thing is that, like I talked about before, programs are targeting low-income households, but not particularly households that are energy poor, so households that pay a disproportionate portion of their income for energy costs, or households that live in least efficient homes, so or households that experience other barriers like navigating complex systems of support. People like, I'm a newcomer, I'm an immigrant, and people like me may have additional challenges navigating complex systems of support, and there aren't many programs, not many that provide these sort of targeted approaches. With this as background, let's talk about what a responsible and appropriate role could be for the federal government in low-income energy efficiency. So I've grouped these by two. So there's 4 roles that we've identified in the report. So the first 2 are just focusing on results, focusing on high-level results, setting targets, and letting provinces meet them within the context of what they're already doing. So deeper retrofits, setting targets for energy savings per household, setting targets for fuel switching to zero carbon technologies, setting targets for reaching households most in need, or some kind of targets for what we're calling enabling upgrades. So low income households, right, with participation rates of less than 2%, they have a once in a generation chance. Most households, most low income households will participate in some program or the other. If they do, once in a generation. Imagine locking in a low income household today without anticipating what technology and where is going to happen down the road. We need to be thinking, the federal government could encourage existing programs to think more about enabling upgrades. So the other thing would be creating supportive systems and platforms. So we don't have detailed data on energy poverty in this country, who is experiencing energy poverty, what that looks like by demographics. There's some data out there, we can talk about that in Q&A, but that data has gaps and has limitations. So we can address that. Federal government can do a better job of connecting energy use with home energy efficiency, and we'll talk about that a bit later. And creating systems like more detailed data on energy poverty by location and housing type. Training skilled and diverse workforce so that people with lived experiences are leading these programs across the value chain, from installers right away to program administrators and so on. And something like net zero standards by building topology to guide and region to guide low income retrofits. An example for this would be the United Kingdom, where their high level target for reducing energy poverty is quite simply ensuring that energy poor households achieve a minimum home energy rating better than 20% better than or equal to the top 20% of the most efficient. So think about all the levers that federal and provincial governments can turn to operationalize this high level target, right? Every building in the UK has an energy performance contract. Now, we can talk more detail about how the energy performance certificates and how they work, but every building and on condition of sale or rent has an energy performance certificate. So now program administrators can target and say, I want to lift the most energy poor households that are living in the least efficient homes and move them a couple of bands up the efficiency chart and so on, right? So this is a strong role that the federal government is uniquely positioned to play. The other two roles the federal government could play would be to leverage and enhance existing delivery capacity and not, duplicating resources, coming up with a whole new program that creates confusion in the market, but taking what's already working and then enhancing their ability, and doing this in a way through stable long-term funding, not boom and bust funding cycles, right? Which just creates confusion in the market, makes it hard for contractors to develop business models around it and so on. A good example for this would be looking south of our border, the United States, actually. Perhaps some of you might find it surprising that we have to look down south of the border for policy leadership on this file, but the United States has, for the past 45 to 47 years, every single year, the federal government has consistently funded and provided supplemental funding to state and local low-income energy efficiency programs. So what they do is they have certain federal objectives. They say average investment per household should at least be this much. There's this pocket of money for health and safety upgrades. There's a couple of just a few objectives that local programs are expected to meet, but beyond that, they can use it in ways that supplements their existing ongoing efforts. And in provinces, in states, I should say, like Alabama, for example, which doesn't have a provincial program, the federal funding actually flows through directly to local contractors who do the work. Perhaps this could be a model in Alberta, which is the only province in Canada that doesn't have, at the moment, a low-income energy efficiency program. So taken together, these four sort of high-level guiding principles for a federal role would avoid market confusion, direct resources towards programs that are already working, but expand their scale and scope so that not only are they meeting the provincial policy objectives, but we're leveraging this massive infrastructure towards lifting households out of energy poverty, while also helping achieve national goals like getting to net zero emissions. It's both pragmatic and also equitable. So if we are to get to net zero by 2050, the pathway to going there will have to go through every single household in this country. And to do that, we need a targeted low-income program, the federal government to take seriously the unique challenges that low-income households have and energy-poor households have, and not just treat this sector as an afterthought, but something that deserves attention separately and has supports directed towards it in appropriate ways, much like how provincial governments are already doing. I will wrap this up by talking about what's next. So I am very encouraged by the federal NDP and Liberal government supply and confidence agreement, I believe it's called, that specifically calls out the need for targeted supports for low-income households and multi-unit residential units. That to me is like, I think one of the first times that I've seen low-income energy efficiency receive such an attention at such a national federal scale. And I have to admit that I am extremely disappointed and discouraged by just a couple of days ago, the emissions reduction plan had committed, I believe, $485.5 million towards low-income households, but it comes in the form of loans through the Greener Home loan program. And like I've said before, low-income households need no-cost, turnkey solutions today to lock in savings. They don't have the capacity to sit around and wait for a loan. They can't afford the upfront costs. Even if it's an interest-free loan, they can't afford the upfront costs and then try to recover that through loan. They cannot afford to take on the additional debt burden. And there's no G7, G20 country in the world that thinks that it can, solve the climate crisis by pushing loans onto low-income households. Every G7 country in the world has a targeted program has a national strategy for energy poverty. And it's extremely discouraging and disappointing. And I personally think it's frankly irresponsible for a federal government to think that the way to solve the climate crisis and lift households out of energy poverty is by pushing loans onto them. I hope that we can have a good productive discussion on it and perhaps suggest some alternatives to taking this approach, and I'd be happy to talk about that offline or in the Q&A. Having said that, I am really excited for upcoming Energy Efficiency Canada research. Man, we've got so many projects on, especially on low income coming down, tenant rights and how it interacts with deep retrofits. The people-centered retrofits and what they look like. Lived experiences of people living in energy poverty. So I've got a whole, a binder full of projects that I'm really excited to work on. And that's what's coming down the pipeline for us. And this is me. You can get in touch with me via email. I think most of you know how to find me. And like Tseli said earlier, we're going to try something new. Okay, so bear with us. We're going to have an after party, like a fireside chat, a virtual fireside chat with virtual s'mores, but real friends, right? So this is how you would access it. So you go to Discovery, click on sign up, follow the instructions, find the campfire and join the campfire. And when you do that, this is the kind of screen that you're looking for. And when you do that, one of us will be there saying hi. And that's me.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Abhi. So we're now opening up the question and answer portion of the discovery session. If you have any questions for Abhi, as I've mentioned, Kelsey's texted, written in the chat, please pop them in the Q&A and we'll answer them as we go along. So Abhi, the first question I have for you is from Joshua Kelly, who asks, do you think ESCOs have a place in the residential space to support low-income projects?
Yes, but I will caveat that. So ESCOs are energy service companies. Sorry, I'm blanking on the expansion of the thing, but roughly the idea is that these are organizations that will take a high-level target and find ways of achieving. So they get rewarded based on reaching certain outcomes, right? So yes, there are some successful models that energy service corporations or ESCOs are using in jurisdictions like the United States, but we need to pay attention to program design elements and make sure that they're not just skimming the cream off the top, right? Taking like the highest value or highest energy savings just to meet their metrics, but are doing so in a way that actually is helping people most in need.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We have a question from Brendan Haley who asks, why do provincial programs look the way they do? What are the different objectives of provincial versus federal programs?
Excellent question, Brendan. I think you and I will get along really well. So yeah, so as I alluded to earlier in my presentation, provincial programs are a byproduct of the policy regime that they're in. And so A lot of them are based on, demand side management programs by utility regulators. Some of them are run by housing corporations. And so their objectives, the way their incentives are aligned, it kind of pulls investments and pulls program design towards achieving a energy savings, kilowatt, megawatt hour savings on the aggregate. And as a result, it doesn't really focus, they're not required to meet targets at the per household level. So they're not incentivized to lift households out of energy poverty, and they're also not incentivized to reduce emissions for the low income energy efficiency programs, speaking broadly. This would differ from a federal objective because the federal government has international commitments to meeting net zero and climate targets. We have a climate emergency declaration. We have a pathway to 2050. And so in order to meet all these goals, the federal government is, and meeting these goals while doing it so in an equitable and a fair way, I think the federal government, and through the federal government, also provincial governments, have a responsibility for including low-income households and energy-poor households and households living in least efficient homes as a part of the energy transition.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Before I go to the next question, we just have one request from someone to please put the slide on the joining the campfire back up. I think they're trying to register. Awesome. Thank you. The next question that I have is kind of a two-part question on tenant rights. So we have a question from Liam Cook who asks, how do we support large private rental stock that is not deemed affordable housing, but the majority of tenants would live in energy poverty? And I mean, a follow-up to that is a question from Brennan Haley who asks, how do we protect tenant rights alongside energy efficiency upgrades? And how do loans work in the multi-unit residential space? Does that all make sense?
No, these are fantastic questions. And I hope this doesn't sound like a cop-out, but stay tuned. This is our next biggest line of sight. So as soon as this presentation is over and after I take a long nap over the weekend, when I come back on Monday, the next project I'm working on is looking at exactly these questions. These are very important questions. We need to take this very seriously. So a couple of quick things. First thing is that renters disproportionately experience energy poverty. So what I mean by that is out of a universe of renters, a greater percentage of them experience energy poverty compared to homeowners. A smaller percentage of homeowners experience energy poverty, right?
True.
But when you look at sheer numbers, I mean, Canada is a country of homeowners. Like I believe between 70 or 80% of Canadians are homeowners. So when you look at sheer numbers, a vast majority of people in energy poverty are actually homeowners. And so the rental, passing on the savings to tenants, how do we protect tenants before, during, and after retrofit so that there's no renovation? There is, so that the costs of the install are not just passed on to them. So these are like really difficult questions, tough questions that we are excited to take on. So let's connect back same time in October and I'll have more detailed answers. But just important to note that this is a very important piece of equitableness and fairness as a part of energy poverty strategies.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I have another follow-up question from Alison Mostovich who asks, were there any interesting cultural findings in your research?
A gap that we identified is that households that experience challenges navigating complex systems of supports like seniors or immigrants, newcomers, don't in most programs receive targeted attention. And I think it's households who don't speak English or French as a language at home, and also there's issues around trust and that sort of thing, right? So I in terms of like cultural findings, I would say that programs that are leveraging like local relationships, local partnerships, and have trusted members in the community to service them I'm encouraged by seeing programs like that. There isn't nearly enough of them, but there is enough of them out there that can serve as templates for other program managers to look at. And I would encourage them to look at our report, see examples of some of that work, and then try to perhaps replicate that in their own contexts.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I have a question from Martin Moster who asks, does each energy efficiency investment reduce GHG emissions? And which ones have the highest both energy efficiency and GHG emission paybacks? Are these results similar or different by province and territory?
Yes, these results would differ by province and territory. Yeah, they would differ by existing fuel sources. And yeah, they would differ by energy prices and fuel costs. And so these are And they also differ by just basically how houses are using this energy. So it would be very difficult for me to provide and it wouldn't be fair for me to provide like a province by province breakdown on here's what works, here what doesn't, in the context of what we're talking about. But setting a high level target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions or investing or replacing GHG intensive heating with fossil, net zero ready heating systems where applicable, where technically feasible, where economically feasible, actually locks in savings in the long term, especially when we're looking at a future with increasing carbon taxes and so on. So I would encourage, what the report does is it identifies a role for the federal government to sort of identify these targets and provide funding to provincial programs that are already doing the work of replacing them by doing that in a way that also locks in greenhouse gas emissions in the future.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. The next question we have, it's another two-parter on municipalities. I have a question from Amy Fournier who asks, what is the best role for municipalities? And a follow-up question from Aidan Gallant who says, what is a better alternative to loans, such as those under PACE financing, that governments at the municipal level can consider?
So that's a fantastic question. And, I spent a lot of time doing research on between the provincial and the governance layer between provincial and municipal level and see what households might do on energy poverty. So what we, at this stage, again, that's research project number 3. I promise after after the Tenant report, the next thing we'd like to look at is the relationship between cities and low-income energy provincial programs. What I can tell you is based on what other jurisdictions are doing, like say the United States, the United Kingdom, or in Europe, is to connect with the provincial administrators and do better at helping residents connect with them. So for example, a lot of local community groups in a city would run a tax clinic, right? At the end of the financial year. Most households don't know how much they make in terms of incomes, as it turns out, off the top of their head. So if you're at a tax clinic, you have that number right there in front of you, and then someone at the tax clinic would then just sign you up for a low-income energy efficiency program in the event that you're interested in it, right? So these are the kind of local relationships that a provincial program might not have enough, relationship at the local level. So the local government can immediately start playing a more advanced role in connecting people with existing resources, existing programs. But I will also caution them against using mechanisms like PACE and loan-based programs towards reducing, attending loan. It's the same thing as what we talk about the federal role, right? So pushing loans onto households that, that cannot afford to take on additional debt burden is an irresponsible way to try to solve energy poverty.
And actually, a follow-up question to that from Erica is, what other enabling financing solutions might be involved in place of loans, in your opinion?
So enabling financing mechanisms at the federal or provincial level would be, I want to move away from, financing mechanisms and talk about funding mechanisms, right? So funding health and safety upgrades is a critical part, which would unlock a whole segment of the population that previously has never had access to low-income energy programs. And so in terms of certain financing programs, so there are, in ways that you can aggregate low-income households together, social housing and affordable housing, multi-unit residential housing could perhaps be good candidates for some kind of funding program that helps them make upgrades as unit turnover happens. But in general, low-income households are best served by no-cost and turnkey retrofits today.
Okay, thank you. What do you hope to see for the future of low-income energy efficiency programs?
Oh, man, I have a whole wish list. I would just say that I just hope that we keep on par with our sister jurisdictions. Like there are Europe, United Kingdom, with like multi-level governance and federated structure, have set a lot of good examples in being able to identify households that need support the most, setting high-level targets. So the EU, the European Union, and we referenced this in an earlier blog, commits 25% of all its, enough to say that other jurisdictions are setting high-level targets at the national level, directing a certain percentage of all climate spending towards an equitable and just transition. And in terms of low-income energy efficiency, reducing energy poverty, being able to identify households that need support the most and targeting them for supports. These are things I think that we that I'd like to see. I'd also like to look at what academics and researchers are doing and see what the sort of contours of like research questions we're asking in Canada, right? What is the Canadian thought on energy? And take practitioners and understand what their biggest questions are and connect them with researchers that are only doing the work. Like I'm like a kid in a candy store with this stuff. So I've got a long list. If anyone wants to chat about it, just join us in the fireside chat.
In the hub. Exactly. Is there anything that surprised you about your research?
Great question. So I was surprised by just how many low-income energy, how long a time a lot of these programs are spent in the market. And just knowing, because sometimes they're run by, like, I'll give you an example. Newfoundland's low-income energy efficiency program is actually run by the Housing Corporation, and they have very specific and how energy efficiency is used to further like other provincial policies. So in the Northern Territories, a lot of the supplemental programs that I talked about, they are actually helping people get on a pathway to home ownership. In Newfoundland, like they usually, I mean, they don't have it institutionalized in terms of targets, but in terms of outcomes, a majority of people that access these low-income energy efficiency programs tend to be seniors on fixed incomes who benefit the most by, through these measures, and especially folks that may not be able to move or travel and move to a different jurisdiction that can cut their costs. So it was very surprising and very encouraging for me that looking at what program design can do and the kind of outcomes that it gets you, getting beyond like the GHG stuff and or getting beyond like megawatt hour stuff and thinking more broadly about the larger benefits, the more holistic benefits from supporting low-income energy efficiency programs was very encouraging for me to see. I was also surprised that there was actually one province in Canada that didn't have a low-income energy efficiency program, and that's Alberta. But I hear that good news might be on the horizon. I hear, folks that used to, administer the program before are rallying support to try to bring it back again. So we'll see if that happens. But
okay, perfect. Thank you. We have a question from Trudy Spooner, who asks, what, in your opinion, is the best way to determine low income? Example, one household income level, or scaled based on the number of people who live there, or some other method?
All measures are imperfect. It just depends on what your goals are. I think one program that I will, so some of these supplemental programs in Northern Territories, and then there's a newly launched program by Clean BC, because it's called, I'm blanking on the name right now, but it's income qualified rebate program. So rather than have sharp cliffs that say, if you're below an arbitrary line that we're drawing based on whatever criteria, you receive support, and then above this, you don't. It would be encouraging to see a more sliding scale sort of an approach based on incomes. So if your incomes are significantly lower than a certain line in the sand, then you receive a lot more support than someone who was of a higher income category and so on. So I think those kind of elements would be interesting to see in programs. And I'll also say that we don't have enough programs in this country to be able to. I would encourage program managers to experiment, if you will, and innovate with this sort of qualifying people in programs. We highlight in the report is that some programs don't have a preliminary income qualification. They use, if you participate in another government program, you sometimes qualify because, it just makes administration easier and so on. So there are a lot of innovative ways to do so. It depends on what your goals are and working backwards from there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. We have two final questions. One question is, what are actions people can take to advocate for low income energy efficiency?
I would say that, just being more politically active. We had a letter campaign that 130 organizations, I believe, signed on that called for a $2 billion investment in low income energy efficiency at the federal level. That is on par and commensurate. The level of support is commensurate with what has already been committed to higher income Canadians and people who have the ability to pay for this stuff. So I think that is fair and reasonable at the federal level to support low income households that need help the most at the same level. So Efficiency Canada has launched campaigns in the past, asking federal government to do stuff like this. I would just say, keep following our work, and we will plug you in every time an opportunity arises. And just keep an eye out, and then low-income energy efficiency is not an exciting topic, right? It's not as exciting as electric vehicles or solar panels and all of these things. I mean, those are great and fantastic, don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a bit of a more esoteric topic, and it's overlapped with anti-poverty and this and a lot of these things, a lot of barriers and stuff like that. So it's not as well exciting as some of the other energy transition stuff, but someone's got to keep an eye on this stuff, man. And if it's you, and if that's your calling, I would just encourage you to be more active, watch the research we're doing, and just stay engaged and stay active.
Alrighty. And before we head off to the Discovery Hub, final question for you is, if people walk away with one takeaway today, what would you hope it would be?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that the federal government has an opportunity here to play a strong leadership role in making sure that our response to the climate crisis is equitable, just, and fair. And they can do that by leveraging existing programs and then expanding their ambition, scale, and capacity to lift households out of energy poverty and to achieve net zero emissions. And anything short of that, anything other than that, like trying to push loans onto low-income households, is unprecedented, and and none of our subnational jurisdictions are taking that approach. None of our colleagues in the wider world and other nations are taking that approach. We would be for the federal government, I would encourage the federal government and other governments to read our report, look at the different ways in which we've identified how they can play a strong role, and use that to guide their actions in the future.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Abhi.
I guess, but it is what it is.
It's a great one. Thank you. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for today's Discovery session. As we've mentioned, we do have an after party happening on the Discovery Hub. The link is in the chat, so we'll leave this open for about 2 to 3 minutes just to allow people to move on over to there. But we will see people that have time for after party on the campfire, and to those who don't, thank you very much for joining, and the recording will be up on our website in about a week or so. Thank you very much, and thank you to you, Abhi.
Thanks for having me, Tseli. I enjoyed your leadership as always.
Thank you. Alrighty, we're gonna hop over to the hub and we'll see everyone there.
See you in a bit.
Thank you. Bye.